Right now, deputies are working to figure out why a 14-year-old allegedly killed his parents.
Yeah, deputies say the teen called 911 just after midnight, saying he killed David Lee and Brandi Smith. The bodies are found.
Clay County Sheriff Michelle Cook says David Lee and Brandi Smith were shot to death.
Good kid, straight A student.
He was funny, charismatic. He always brought good energy, good vibes. He told me that he loved me, and he told me that he was just calling to tell me goodnight.
I don't know what caused him to do it, so.
They were probably the best or one of the best families I knew. They were funny, and they treated me very well. They told me all the time that they loved me like a son.
I guess I never know what caused him to do that, because, like I say, he had good parents. So for him to, do that, we don't know why.
What drives a 14-year-old to walk out of his own home and into a church to confess he has just killed his parents? That question would send shockwaves through the quiet town of Middleburg, Florida, a small community that had always considered itself safe, predictable, ordinary. But on the morning of August 4th, 2025, the ordinary turned unthinkable. It was just past midnight when a 911 call came into the Clay County Dispatch Center. The voice on the other end was soft, young, but disturbingly calm. The boy identified himself as 14-year-old Trevor Lee. His words were short and deliberate. He said he had just shot his parents, that deputies would find them at their home, and that he was now walking to a nearby church to wait for arrest. Then, in the silence that followed, he made one more request. He asked the dispatcher to pray with him. When the first patrol units arrived at the church, they found the boy exactly where he said he'd be. He was unarmed, waiting quietly in the parking lot. Officers detained him without resistance. At almost the same time, another set of deputies arrived at a small house off Silver Point and County Road 220. Inside the main bedroom, they found 45-year-old Brandi Lashall Smith and her husband, 44-year-old David Kevin Lee. Both were dead from multiple gunshot wounds. The gun used in the killings was found inside the room, near the couple's bodies. Investigators quickly confirmed that the weapon belonged to the family. On the floor and nearby dresser, technicians marked several spent shell casings, small brass witnesses to what had happened only minutes earlier. Sheriff Michelle Cook would later describe it as a domestic argument that spiraled into tragedy. This appears to be an isolated incident, she told reporters. There is no ongoing threat to the community. Those words, isolated incident, did little to comfort the people of Middleburg, because isolation is exactly what terrified them. How could something so violent, so sudden, come from within a family that seemed so typical? Friends described Brandi and David as devoted parents, kind, social, people who laughed easily. Their Facebook photos showed fishing trips, backyard cookouts, their son's school events. Neighbors remembered them as that family that waved every morning. But photographs freeze time. They don't tell you what's happening behind closed doors. As daylight broke, yellow tape stretched across the quiet street. Reporters gathered near the property line, their microphones trembling in the humid Florida air. By noon, national outlets had picked up the story. Teen confesses to killing parents after argument. But what the headlines missed was how personal, how intimate this kind of tragedy really is. The call didn't come from a stranger, not from a witness. It came from the child who'd grown up inside those walls. Later that morning, the sheriff's office confirmed the basic timeline. Sometime after midnight, an argument took place inside the family home. The nature of that argument remains redacted in police reports. No motive was officially released. What is confirmed is that shots were fired in the parents' bedroom and that Trevor Lee left the weapon behind before walking roughly 1 mile to a nearby church. There, In a moment that would define the rest of his life, he picked up the phone and called 911. In the days that followed, Clay County residents tried to make sense of the unimaginable. Some brought flowers to the church steps, others left candles at the edge of the family's driveway. And then came the stories, the fragments of who Brandi and David were, stitched together from coworkers, friends, and a few lines written online. Brandi Smith was described as the heart of her home, a woman who loved fiercely and worked tirelessly. She had once posted a photo of her son with a caption that read, "This boy gives me pure hell. Everything I did to my parents, I'm getting back times 10. Keep us lifted up in prayer." At the time, it read like humor, a mother's light-hearted sigh. In hindsight, it feels like a quiet plea. David Lee, her husband, worked locally and was known as dependable, polite, a family man who never missed his son's school functions. Friends called them a couple who did everything together. They were the kind of people others leaned on. No one imagined they would one day be spoken of in the past tense. Investigators processed the home for more than 12 hours. Evidence technicians moved deliberately, photographing, collecting, sealing each item. The final report, when released, was heavily redacted. What remains visible are the basics: location of the casings, recovery of the firearm, identification of the victims. The juvenile defendant held without bond. 5 prior calls for service at the address listed, but contents withheld. The sheriff's office confirmed those calls existed, but would not specify whether they were domestic disturbances, welfare checks, or something else. Each redaction is a blank space, a reminder of how much the public doesn't know and how much investigators still need to confirm before trial. As journalists pressed for answers, the story moved from the streets to the courtroom. On August 12th, just 8 days after the killings, a Clay County grand jury indicted Trevor Lee on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The following week, he appeared in court. Dressed in juvenile detention blues, he spoke softly as the judge read the charges. Through his attorney, he entered a plea of not guilty. The courtroom was quiet. Family members sat in the gallery, some weeping, others staring at the floor, their lives permanently divided into before and after. The presiding judge scheduled a pre-trial hearing for late September and a tentative trial date for February 10th, 2026. The defense has since requested evaluations and additional discovery time. Because of the defendant's age, several motions will likely focus on whether he should be tried fully as an adult. For now, those discussions remain pending. The legal process, like grief, moves slowly. For those outside the courtroom, the questions linger louder than the answers. How does a teenager reach a point where violence feels like an option? What did those final moments look like? And what can a community learn from a case like this? Sheriff Cook addressed those questions cautiously. We're still looking into his history at school, any guidance counseling, therapy, or prior incidents, she said in her press briefing. This investigation is still in its early stages. When asked whether the boy had a mental health record or a pattern of trouble, she declined to comment, repeating that all findings would come through formal discovery. Behind every true crime case, there are layers we never see. Years of family dynamic, unspoken tension, the private world that precedes public tragedy. What we can confirm here is limited but powerful. A 911 call, a confession, 2 lives lost, an indictment, and a timeline that the court will eventually dissect in detail. The rest, motive, emotion, reason, will be left to the evidence. Still, fragments of the family's final hours remain preserved in one haunting record, the friend's testimony. One of Trevor's closest friends, a boy named Kiri, told reporters he had spoken with Trevor just hours before the shooting. "He told me he loved me," Kiri said. "He told me he was just calling to say goodnight." That was around 12:30 a.m. Less than an hour later, the call to 911 was made. Kiri described the Lee family as kind, generous, like a second family. He said Brandi and David treated him like a son. When asked how he felt about the charges, Kiri hesitated. "He's not a bad person," he said softly. "He just made a bad decision." Those words echo painfully through the footage, young voices trying to process adult tragedy. In the weeks that followed, court filings began to appear. Motions for discovery, requests for psychological evaluation, scheduling orders. Each document added another date to the calendar, but not another answer. Local media covered the story sparingly, respecting the juvenile's age. National coverage faded quickly, replaced by the next headline. But in Clay County, the loss still hung in the air. Teachers and neighbors spoke quietly about the family they once knew. A local pastor organized a small vigil outside the same church where the 911 call had been made. He didn't preach about guilt or innocence. He spoke about healing, the kind that comes slowly and painfully, if it comes at all. As the months passed, investigators maintained their position. No evidence of outside involvement, no indication of burglary or intrusion, no sign of anyone else in the home that night. It was, by all accounts, a closed environment. One family, one weapon, one irreversible act. The case remains open pending trial, but the outline is clear enough to trace. What remains hardest to understand is the calmness of that phone call. Seasoned detectives say that's what haunts them most. Not the violence, but the composure. In a field where panic and chaos are common, the quiet voice of a 14-year-old confessing without emotion is something few ever forget. When the dispatcher asked if he was sure his parents were dead, he reportedly answered, "Yes, ma'am." Then he paused and asked her to pray with him. In that moment, somewhere between remorse and detachment, he showed the world a glimpse of how complex human tragedy can be. The Clay County Sheriff's Office has urged the public to refrain from speculation. The court filings emphasize confidentiality given the defendant's age. Yet the facts, those that can be shared, already tell a devastating story. A mother and father dead, a son accused, a neighborhood forever changed. Cases like this ripple outward. They force communities to confront uncomfortable realities. How access to firearms intersects with adolescence. How anger, depression, or entitlement can metastasize in silence. How love can exist alongside conflict until one moment of irreversible damage. There are no villains that make sense here, only victims and consequences. In the digital age, tragedy moves fast, often stripped of context. But if we slow down and look closely, we can see how fragile family dynamics can be, how quickly pressure turns to breaking point. We can't know what words were exchanged in that house before the first shot. We can only know the result. And it's enough to remind us that violence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lives quietly until it doesn't. As of today, the official record shows the following. On August 4th, 2025, Trevor Lee was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. On August 12th, a grand jury formally indicted him. On August 19th, he entered a plea of not guilty. The trial is scheduled to begin on February 10th, 2026 in Clay County Circuit Court. The case remains active, and updates will continue as court proceedings progress. Every detail reported here has been verified through official documents, law enforcement statements, and recognized media outlets. No speculation, no rumor, only receipts. 2 lives lost, a community grieving, and a question that will echo long after the verdict is read. How did a family built on love and laughter end like this? For Brandi Smith and David Lee, their story should not be remembered for its violence, but for its warning. For every parent, every child, every household that assumes it could never happen there. Because the truth is, the quietest homes can carry the loudest silences. May their memory stand as both heartbreak and lesson. And may we all remember that behind every headline, there are people, flawed, human, real, whose stories deserve to be told with care, accuracy, and respect. This is not about speculation or shock. It's about understanding what really happened through facts alone. Because in the end, truth needs no exaggeration. And that is the story so far of Brandi Lashall Smith and David Kevin Lee.